Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K313 Venom of the Red Lotus, the finale for Book 3 Change, and also the 100th episode of Avatar when you include Avatar and Korra together. This is episode 39 of Korra. Avatar had 61 episodes, so this is the 100th. So that's a pretty interesting milestone. As an episode, I think it is good. It's like a impactful finale. It doesn't feel incredibly satisfying because it is the conclusion of a book where our villains weren't developed all that much, and you killed 3 of the 4, and in a way the writers did their best to sort of like undermine how you should feel about Zaheer right at the end. They managed to roughly bring the book full circle by bringing the airbenders kind of more heavily back into things, Jinora more heavily back into things, having her play a role in the resolution of the final battle, more or less the airbenders kind of being what causes Zaheer's defeat. And I think one thing that this episode does deserve praise for is that it does set up a very interesting premise for Book 4. That being that we end this book with Korra in a wheelchair, out of action, and this isn't the sort of thing where we're just going to jump back into the next book and she's going to be perfectly okay back as the Avatar. They're not just having her be like, oh yeah, she'll need some recuperation time, like obviously like Bumi and Kaya, Tenzin, they're all injured. They'll recover by the time the next book starts, but with Korra, this is such a like serious thing what she's been through. The way the characters are talking about this is big. She probably won't be back in action, and as they point out, it's at a time when in a way she's needed the most because of the Earth Kingdom is in complete chaos, as they say. So I think it does some stuff well, but just its overall plot about the villains, because all the villains are the plot point basically of each book of Korra, it is the weakest section of the story, I think. And just, I think in general, the writing, it just being, I think, too disjointed. Like, it's pretty much been since episode 7 since we've properly had time with the airbenders, because when we came back to them, it was mainly Tenzin fighting in episode 11, and the focus elsewhere was kind of just, again, on the action here. So, you know, that plot point, like, important at the start, important in episode 7, and then comes back right at the end. You know, Lin and Sue being a very, like, episode 5 and 6 contained thing. Kai being linked into that. Opal, like, being part of 5 and 6, and then seemingly joining the Airbender plot, but then us not getting any development with her on that side of things. There's some missed opportunities with this book, but I would still say that this is a good episode. It is a good final episode. It's just, it could have been it could have been so much better, because if the villains were developed, if they'd changed up some things a little bit. But let's get into properly analysing this, and we'll do a little bit of a Book 3 overview at the end. So, very, very action-centric episodes in that I don't think there'll be, like, tons to discuss here, just because we do have to, like, focus primarily on action. And yeah, we kick off immediately with the reveal, like the plan with the poisoning is, of course, they want to use the poison to force Korra into the Avatar state, and then kill her to get rid of the Avatar. Because roughly, and I think this is a bit of a problem with the Red Lotus, like, yes, I think you can assume that the reason the Red Lotus want to kill the Avatar is because they see the Avatar as a pseudo-world leader, someone who can influence the world, someone who people will look up to, and because of that, it takes away maybe some individual freedom from people, which is what the Red Lotus are all about. And so you can sort of kind of manipulate kind of it into being that way. I think we needed a little bit of a better justification. Like, I get it, like they want to take Korra out of the picture here, but they want to take the Avatar full stop out of the picture. Like, it seems like they just completely abandoned the idea that, like, we want to, at some point, train the Avatar to have our ideals. They could accomplish that if they just killed Korra, not in the Avatar state, and then kidnap the next avatar, the next Earth avatar. They've already put the Earth Kingdom into chaos, so they should have some way to potentially find the next avatar and make that happen. It just feels a little unexplained that like it suddenly kind of shifts to them. No, we have to take out the avatar for good, and admittedly that's what they try and make, I suppose, Zaheer's kind of new goal as the leader of the Red Lotus. But I think it comes a little like too late at the end of the day. Like, you've basically built up this kind of reveal more or less since the very, very start of the book. Why do they want to capture Korra? Why do they want to capture her and not just kill her? It's to take out the Avatar for good, but for what reason? Because like the Dark Avatar is not a thing anymore. Vaatu, like this group of Red Lotus, they have to give up on because they're not going to be around for when Vaatu comes back. So like, okay, they have to focus on just world leaders and stuff like that. So in that sense, like, why didn't they just take out Korra? I think that's where it's not explained enough. Like, that logically, which this group has been so far, like, why did they feel the need to put themselves at risk? Like, I think it's them over-exaggerating how powerful they are, overestimating themselves, and underestimating the Avatar state. The Avatar state when Korra is poisoned. I don't think they expect it to be as powerful as it is, but we see that play out. Zaheer gives a bit of a speech here about, obviously, like, fundamentally what he's about here, that he wants no one to kind of like live under world leaders, and a man's only allegiance is to like the people he loves, his friends and stuff like that. But again, like this goes into the overall issues with the Red Lotus ideology of just complete chaos being this like kind of absurd thing to really, like, I think properly consider to in any way be any sort of like a practical kind of way to go about things. And especially when he's like spouting kind of nonsense at the end, like you can sort of see like, yeah, that's the kind of crazy side of the Red Lotus. But it's also, they don't present enough of the Korra, even if you don't agree with me fully type situation. You need to do something to change world leaders going forward. So the likes of Raiko, the likes of Hu Ting don't have as big of an impact anymore. They don't really play up that as we go forward. I suppose they kind of try to do it in book 4, but again, Kuvira, like, they do enough to get across that she's a villain, that like we kind of move past it. And then she never really, I suppose, counters Raiko enough. I think that's probably what they should have done after this, is really have Korra like go against Raiko, and it's especially in the comics right now, I feel she should be doing everything possible to like really make sure that Raiko isn't elected, because from a balanced perspective, he's not doing any good. We don't know how much bad he's doing, but you know, it's clear he's not a good president. I think at this point that's pretty obvious. So you know, there's issues here, but what this episode does very well is, like the last couple, is there's an overall amazingly tense, violent tone in a way to it, just with how brutal like Korra getting poisoned is. The fact that she has these hallucinations, you see her kind of body like convulsing, you can tell she's in incredible pain, and the only reason she's really moving throughout all of this is because of the Avatar state. And there is this kind of dark undertone of the episode of like, okay, like Korra's not just in a wheelchair because of like the poison. For sure that's a factor, but it's also, I think, like more or less heavily implied that like she's very badly injured during the fight with Zaheer. The amount of times like she smashes into mountains and falls on the ground, and in a book that's been fairly realistic about injuries, like Bumi and Kaya are out of action because of their injuries, Tenzin's out of action because of his, Tonrok didn't get as hurt, but he's still sort of damaged, so like he's out of action. You have to interpret this as Korra is like pretty like heavily injured in this, like broken bones, that sort of thing. They don't obviously like show it as being like crazy, like brutal, but I think that's the idea here. Lots of fractures or something like that going on. So that's the tone that works here, is that it's just a violent fight because of how extreme the Red Lotus are. And you can even see with the way like Korra nearly takes out the Red Lotus that like Minghua is sent crashing into the wall and like she looks like she could be unconscious. Gazan is nearly like burned by his own lava, just barely dodges out of the way. And I suppose this sort of continues for like the rest of the episode. I think the unfortunate thing is that the Zaheer Korra fight isn't particularly great in terms of choreography. It definitely has an atmosphere to it of like intensity because it is a kind of time bomb of like the Avatar state's what's keeping Korra going in this fight, and it can only keep her going for so long. The second that turns off, Korra is just completely helpless, and Zaheer is going to have the advantage. The problem is, until that happens, the fight just feels overly basic. It's just Zaheer flying around doing some very basic airbending moves, dodging Korra's big attacks, and then sending Korra flying into a wall. And it's kind of just rinse and repeat. They give Korra one opportunity where it looks like she'll get the final blow, but that's when, obviously, the poison sort of takes over, and Zaheer gets the advantage again. I think they tried too hard in this fight to replicate some of how the Aang Ozai fight played out, but the difference was that that had like amazing choreography from both combatants. Here, I really do feel that like just they didn't really know what to do with Zaheer in terms of like amazing choreography. I think you could have had like a pretty cool fight of just Zaheer doing some crazy airbending moves combined with the fact that he can fly without having to use normal airbending, and then just like, you know, fire attacks from any angle, combined with like Korra doing like crazy stuff as well. But they just make it sort of like kind of simplistic, and it does, I think, take away from the fight in that, compare this to say the Korra versus Unalaq fight, where like, okay, Unalaq's just a waterbender, but look how clever they were with a lot of the waterbending stuff there. They used different kind of techniques from Unalaq to dodge the different elements that Korra would use. And then there was this clear thing of like, Unalaq kind of has the advantage over Korra when they just use waterbending. That's how good he is. And the different stages of that fight, adding layers to it of like, they fight beforehand, they fight when like they're both kind of the dark avatar, and the different kind of stages all the time leading to the big kind of spirit battle at the end, which is different. Here, obviously we've had a bit of action between the two of them in the previous episode, but again, Korra was in chains. And I think it ultimately comes back to the fact that you can't really have a one-on-one fight between Korra and Zaheer without putting Korra, having some disadvantage put upon Korra to bring her down to his level. And again, that's the weird thing of like, in a way, Zaheer is one of the weaker members of the Red Lotus because he's close to master level, but he isn't. And because he's so new, you have to put characters who've been doing the technique longer at a level kind of above him, especially when we're dealing with the likes of Tenzin and Korra as the people that he's up against. You know, you can sort of understand perhaps why he's able to beat Tonraq kind of one-on-one, but when you're getting into the really high levels like we are here, the absolute elite benders, you begin to see where, like, to keep the power levels kind of accurate, this is kind of the only way they can really do things. And it's unfortunate, and I think it's a fairly similar situation in book 4 with Korra and Kuvira. They tried to make it that, like, okay, they're out and out even, but they have to have like Korra's like injuries and like kind of mental fragility in a way kind of play a factor in it, and also the secondary fight, like, have it take place in an area completely surrounded by sorry about that. They have to have the secondary fight, the final fight in a way, have it take place in a place completely surrounded by metal, where it gives Kuvira the most opportunity to win. And I think that's ultimately kind of the issue with the last two villains. in that you don't really have Korra ever, like, I think, properly fight them. In that, again, like, Korra only ever fights Zaheer when she's, like, chained up or, like, basically unconscious but in the avatar state. So there's definitely a frustration I have with this final fight. I'd never rate it as being one of the best in the series because I don't think the choreography is good enough. Zaheer, I don't think, does anything particularly great in the fight because flying, while a cool technique and there's a lot to it with obviously the meaning behind it, how you unlock it, it doesn't come across amazingly well visually, or like there's not really many ways to do anything overly clever with it because they don't really incorporate like much airbending with the flight, which I find a bit weird. Maybe it was that you had to do it this way because it was Korra in the avatar state, but it's basically just to get Korra into a position where she's tossed around, she gets beaten up over the course of this fight, and then the avatar state is just, her body is basically kind of shot, and he's preparing to finish the job with the technique he used on Hu Ting of like the suffocation technique. And that's when the other stuff happens. So let's cover that. Jinora kind of comes back more heavily into play here. Like Iki, Opal, Milo get a little bit of a chance to shine here. Getting the kind of keys right as everyone else comes in. Jinora had already kind of used her astral projection technique. So she's aware that like Korra was poisoned by something metallic and has this kind of key information. Plus, she obviously has gone through this development, and so she's going to be like a key player in all of this. But the main result here is that Tonrock is kind of goes outside with everyone else, while Mako and Bolin stay to fend off Minghua and Gazan. They basically set up the big final battle kind of moments with these characters. Rewatching it again, I think it really highlights that I think they should have cut the Korra Zaheer fight down a little bit and given more time to these two fights. Because the Korra Zaheer fight is very, very much a story kind of fight that doesn't need to be that long because you're just getting across like an idea with that fight. Whereas the other two are fights that are going to reach a conclusion. You're actually going to have characters win fights here and it not be the main fight, so the story doesn't come to an end with these characters losing, but it still allows you to actually have characters be defeated, which I appreciate here in that like Mako just gets a just flat out victory over Minghua. He fights. I think it's clear he has the advantage in the cave here. He really kind of defends well. You don't really see a lot of it early on, but the idea is that he pushes her back, she loses her water, she goes down into the kind of depths of the caves where there's a bit of water. He follows her in, and it seems like he's made the mistake of following her, falling into this trap, covered with water. She goes octopus mode, but of course, as like I called at the time, that like, oh, lightning would work perfectly on Minghua. He finishes her off with lightning. Pretty cool, like little acrobatic technique of like suspending himself off the different kind of rock protrusions and then firing the lightning into the water. Whether or not Mako kills her with the lightning, I think is pretty unclear. I think he just kind of knocks her unconscious, and it's Gazan's suicide thing that kills both of them. I think that's the way we're meant to interpret it. But either way, Mako got the clean victory here in this fight. Bolin and Gazan is a little bit more interesting because you actually have some of Gazan's character come out. You see once again how kind of relaxed of a character he is. You see that he actually likes a good fight, and he's intrigued by the fact that Bolin has lava bending now and that the fight will be better. And you can see they basically fight to a draw with normal earth bending. He fires lava, Bolin reveals it, and they play out the story that you'd expect. It's the veteran lava bender against the inexperienced lava bender. Bolin is a kind of very, very strong bender, so he adapts to using lava quite quickly, but Gazan just is so much more used to using it, and Bolin's a little bit more kind of safe with it. So you could see Gazan has the advantage, but because Mako's finished his fight, he comes in and the two brothers just completely outmatch Gazan, which I think works really, really nicely because they've already established that, like, said that individually any of these benders are like the best of the best, that very few characters could go up against them individually. So the fact that they've given Mako a one-on-one victory against one of them just does wonders to get across how powerful he is. The fact that Bolin more or less fights Gazan to a, quote-unquote standstill. You could tell probably if the fight went on longer, Bolin probably would have lost on his own. But the fact that even the two brothers together take out Gazan is, I think, really, really impressive. So I always respect Book 3 for doing the kind of most of the fighting really, really well on this front of just the brothers are actually like amazing benders. You have to acknowledge that. That's when I suppose Jinora, they do the thing of like Zaheer is using a technique that's like thousands of years old, but something that hasn't been around in a long time either is the fact that there are lots of airbenders around. So let's have all the airbenders join in the circle and use their power together to help Korra. And Jinora leads the kind of circle walking, and they just create this giant tornado and fire it at Zaheer. And this is what kind of stops the suffocation of Korra. And it's a I think thematically fitting conclusion to the fight. It's the people he used as his ultimatum, that he was going to kill the airbenders to get Korra to where she is now. Korra's in this position because of the airbenders. They are the ones, the factor he didn't even consider, and he's defeated fundamentally by them. And then also Korra delivering the final blow, she delivers it with the kind of chain slam into the ground, that like his freedom is taken away from him by the chains that he used to kind of chain her up. And it fits kind of thematically with him being all about freedom and so on. And you can sort of see his desperation as he realizes he's losing in this kind of final sequence. It's just, he alone is not enough to do this. It's a really kind of sad moment after that, because you can see when all the action is done, the kind of avatar state is still active in Korra, in that like it's what's kind of keeping her like conscious more or less. When it goes out, like Tonrock is kind of like crying, everyone else is super concerned. Like there definitely was the idea of like, have they killed Korra here? Is there any way to kind of like fix this? But what they do is just that she's unconscious, really, really badly injured. Like she will die if like help doesn't come. This is when the reveal of like Jinora tells Sue that it's metallic. Sue obviously makes more sense than Lin to be the one to do delicate metal bending, and she gets what is later revealed in Book 4 to be most of the poison out, but not all of it. And this is what kind of allows Korra to regain consciousness, but she's still badly injured because the metal was in her for so long, plus the damage she took over the course of the fight. She is out of action. But it's a kind of nice kind of finale in a way for Korra, making this big sacrifice. As for Zaheer at the end, I don't like this at all. I don't like how they have him kind of turn into like the stereotypical raving madman at the end. He just doesn't feel like the sort of character who would do that. He seems like he's calm, composed, kind of intense at all times, but not to the point where he'd just start like laughing like a lunatic because he's been defeated but Korra's dead. I think they just should have had him maintain his composure and just in a threatening way, without being just like starting to go crazy, just kind of calmly talked about how he's won even though he's like been captured again, that this is a loss that like won't be able to be fixed. And then I'd almost prefer that they do a little bit more of a character piece with Zaheer upon seeing Korra regain consciousness, that she will survive this, rather than what they did, which was just have him start going on about like chaos and just go completely crazy. I think there's no other way to interpret it. I don't think you can really explain it away by just saying, well, well, he had this idea that's been taken away from him. Of course, he'd be like a bit like over the top, but what we know of his character, I don't really know where this came from. I don't know what the intent was behind this, because you see none of this in book 4 when Korra and Zaheer meet again. So why did you even have it here? I think the book 4 scene would work better if Zaheer had remained calm through all of this, because the whole point of the book 4 scene is that Zaheer can be like calm, composed, despite being in prison and having the thing he believes in most taken away from him. Yet Korra, who's actually out, she's kind of back in action, should be back as the Avatar again. She's the one struggling to do all this stuff, yet Zaheer can still go into the spirit world. How has he maintained this composure when Korra kind of hasn't? That's like part of that dynamic. So why do they do this here? I think it really is just to get to the joke of like Bolin putting the sock in his mouth, which in a way is like the show poking fun at how over the top and kind of silly in a way the Red Lotus philosophy was, that like Bolin literally putting a sock in Zaheer's mouth to shut him up from talking about his kind of silly ideology. It's like, are you actually making fun of your own kind of character who most people take seriously? Or like, what was the aim here? I really would criticize this scene a lot, because I can't see any way to like justify why they decided to go that way. And I'm okay with criticizing the book 3 villains, but even I think that this is a case of like, you wrote the character the wrong way. Now, admittedly, we don't know Zaheer's character all that much because he doesn't get enough character development. Maybe this is an aspect of his character. It's just very unclear, so I'd be more in line to put this down as a writing error rather than like this fits in line with the character that we know, because I don't think it goes anywhere or like sets up anything. The idea that from the book 4 appearance that we get is more of like, he would have more of a kind of emotional reaction to hearing that the result of what happened was that Kuvira came up, which we sort of see, and I would have emphasized that as like the moment where Zaheer loses his cool, rather than like here, like just seeing Korra alive again, because it really, I think, almost does like what North and South did as a comic, where it turned Gilak from someone you could sort of see where he was coming from into just like the madman, like wanting to kill Hakoda. That there's no justification anymore to what he's doing. He just wants to kill someone now that his plan isn't going to work out. It almost feels like that's what the Red Lotus turned into here, where the ideals are more or less gone. He just wants to make sure Korra's dead. And then that doesn't work out, so he just loses it. So I'll stop talking about it now, but I really not a fan of what they did there. The aftermath of everything, though, the little epilogue for the book that we get, is really, really well done. Of course, there's a bit of frustration because, oh, look who it is, Raiko, kind of praising Korra here, and pointing out some key points here, and now wishing Korra was around, having previously banished her. It's just kind of like, I was waiting for someone to just like hit Raiko kind of during this scene. They're trying to get across that he's showing concern for Korra, but I like that Tonrock at least was a bit like kind of snapped back at him about this. But you know, the way he handles dealing with Korra, I think is just kind of completely all wrong, Raiko. But what's got across here is that they're like, okay, she'll recover over time, but how long will it take? That's what no one is sure about. That she's in a bad way right now. She will recover. They're pretty confident in that. It's just going to take so long when she's needed the most because of what's going on in the Earth Kingdom. That they imply that a week or so, 2 weeks later, the Earth Kingdom is still deep in chaos and it's spread out from just Ba Sing Se. And you know, you see Zuko kind of talk about how they're still trying to investigate how many Red Lotus members there are, which I think they just very quickly wrap up at the start of book 4, that like, oh yeah, the Red Lotus have been rounded up, kind of, which again speaks to like, were we meant to treat the Red Lotus seriously or not? Because you off screen like resolved what a lot of fans consider to be the best villain group. I don't really know what they were doing there, because like, White Lotus. Are we going back to that? No, okay. Especially when like the White Lotus are the ones in charge of Zaheer kind of later on. But what you really get across just again like is Korra is very badly injured. As for the Korra and Asami scene, like I get why some people see this as like romantic, but as I've discussed over the course of this book, like how many notable scenes between Korra and Asami were there this book? A lot of people say that like the start of their development into a romantic relationship started in book 3, but like where? Like before this episode, has there been any like scenes that have leaned into romance? I wouldn't say so. I'd barely even say there was anything overly unique between the two of them outside of just having them both be in the same scene together a lot more than previous books. Maybe the scene in like the first episode where they're in the car together talking about Mako, but even that is kind of like, that's more of like the resolution from the previous book's drama, more so than setting up to where we're going to end up. Even here, it's like, replace Asami with Senna, replace Asami with Katara, Kaya. Does this scene like come across weirdly because of that? I don't think so. I think it plays out the exact same. It makes sense, I think, in a way for it to be Asami. It makes sense that in a way like they're you can use this as the way to more or less establish that are Korra and Asami now like best friends. But is this like where like the romantically it starts? That's where I'm not sure, and I think this is ultimately where the romance kind of struggles for me, is that they never really, outside of the blush that we get in episode 7 of book 4, we never get any, I think, normal setup for a relationship. And because of that, it really comes across, like when the creators came out and said that like, oh yeah, it's all there, we set it up a little bit beforehand, as just like retconning scenes that were never meant to be set up for this as being that. Of just like, suddenly any scene that Korra and Asami are in together is set up for their romance, when I don't think any of the scenes were particularly leaning in that direction all that much, because like I think it's kind of weird if you cite this as the scene that is like the start of them being romantic together, given that like Korra is like at her lowest moment ever. And so I think it starts off a bit weirdly, and they have to do weird things to kind of justify how it starts. I don't mind that Korra and Asami is the endgame relationship. It's just I'd never say that book 3 is like development for the relationship and how it happens. The Jinora becoming a master airbender, really, really good scene, and like book 2 is probably Jinora's best book. They followed that on here by giving her, I think, a solid arc of just developing from basically being a kid character who's notable with her spirit abilities, I think transitioning her into a role where you can now sort of consider Jinora more like a kind of member of Team Avatar. She's sort of different than Iki and Milo now. She's more, you can look to her in a way as one of the more kind of like leader characters because of this. Tenzin gives a really good speech getting across, Jinora's leadership qualities that she displayed in leading the other airbenders to help Korra, getting across with Korra how much she sacrificed to do this, the service and sacrifice. The music is amazing, and I think this scene works really well because there's a lot going on, and it's a really kind of complicated scene because there's so much happening. It's Jinora's big moment. It's Tenzin kind of establishing where the airbenders are going, what different direction that they're going to take, that they're going to be nomads again, but they're sort of going to fill in for the Avatar while Korra's out of action. They're going to go around and sort of be peacekeepers around the world. Jedi, more or less. Everyone made that comparison at the time. And Korra is sort of happy about this, but then you can see they cut back to her. The final scene of this book is Korra with the tear rolling down her face. And it's meant to be this moment of just, she's happy that, you know, the airbenders are back. Jinora's a great moment. But it's also a scene of, for Korra, who we know wants to be active, wants to be at the center of all of these things. She's in a position where she can't, and now she's kind of seeing the airbenders like replace her. And it's this kind of scene of like, oh, so kind of like I am replaceable, and just the start of that kind of more kind of in Korra's head arc of like how she views herself as the Avatar and what we're going to like experience in the early episodes of book 4. So I do think they set that up really well. It is kind of like an arc. Her arc in book 3 sets up her arc in book 4, so it's kind of like she doesn't really have a lot to do this book. She was just herself, and then made this sacrifice at the end because her like goal was about kind of bringing the airbenders back. But book 4 is where they properly like return to, I think, giving her a full, you know, character arc. So that works out quite well. Jinora gets a great moment. Tenzin's speech is really strong. And the book ends on a very, you know, sad note. And that's definitely a success of this book, because the speculation between books was crazy about this. Like, just what are they going to do? We heard about the time skip, and we're wondering, like, how's it going to play out? Will Korra just return as normal, or what? And when the trailers came out, we're just kind of like, what's going on here? The haircut, the different outfit. It plays out really well, which we'll get to in the upcoming episodes. For some quick final thoughts on book 3 before we kind of end the book 3 rewatch. I want to make it really clear, it's not that I dislike book 3. I've maybe been overly critical across all of these episodes. I do still like the book. It's not, I don't hate any book of Avatar. I don't really hate any episode of Avatar. But it frustrates me to a degree to see it always be said anywhere someone asks the question, what's the best book of Korra? And the default answer always tends to be book 3. And I always go like, no, why? And I can never really remove book 3 from the fact that most underdeveloped villains, just like the group, the individual characters within it, Korra doesn't have a character arc. It's very disjointed, as I talked about, in that like it starts off like it's about airbenders, then we skip to have the Lin arc, then we go back to the airbenders for an episode, then the Red Lotus kind of properly come into play, but are never properly, like, I think, given the development that they need, and the airbenders come back, and it's like they just about keep things going. And it just feels like this is a book that would have worked much better if we had had more episodes, but as it is right now, it just feels like they've got a lot of very, very interesting things going on, but not enough time to give each of those things enough development. And I think the only thing that they kind of satisfactorily did that was just, I think, you know, full on solid was the Lin and Sue stuff, I think, was well done. I will praise the book for introducing strong characters in Opal and Kai, but towards the end of the book, kind of failing to use them as effectively as it could. Opal especially. Kai at least gets his kind of hero moment of like coming back after being blown out of the sky. Opal, though, I think is a real, that's I think the real frustration. Given that like you start out the next book and kind of Opal is sort of in the position that you sort of expected her to be in after her introduction, it just feels like we're missing this step of like her dream was to become an airbender, like after she obviously found out that she was an airbender. It's this whole character arc of kind of finally getting to go to the Northern Air Temple, and then we skip past that. That was frustrating to see. Similarly with that, it's like individual things with like Team Avatar of like setting up this kind of Mako's really weird with the girls arc, and really hammering it home in the early episodes that he's awkward, and then not really making an arc out of it, but also not really forgetting about it. And so it ends up just being this like very light thing that doesn't actually have any proper development, and so it just kind of fizzles out, and it's just kind of like, what was that for? Like, did you even need to do it in the first place? And the Red Lotus are, you know, really cool in fights. There's a great atmosphere around them. The idea in concept is very, very cool. 4 elite benders, most of them having a special ability, all of them by the end of the book having a special ability in bending, having this kind of history, being part of this group that is linked to the Order of the White Lotus. But that's really all there is. All there is really talking about how, like, there are all these links. There's no depth to any of it because they just told us and didn't show us any of this. Imagine how much more meaningful this would be if we properly knew, like, Ghazan's backstory, why freedom meant so much to him, knew Ming-Hua's backstory, Poli's, Zaheer's, and then the death of 3 of these 4 characters would mean so much more. Zaheer continuing on into book 4 would mean so much more if we knew where he came from, and all of that. As it is, it just feels like, as I said, there was too much going on. That 13 episodes just was not enough to cover it all. I respect this book to a degree for not just completely fumbling everything, but there's enough kind of like cuts along the way that for me, the book ends up being, for me, the weakest of Korra, because it just kind of is that kind of like death of 1,000 cuts type thing of just little bits and pieces throughout the entire book come together to overall just make it feel a little bit unsatisfying to me, in that come the end of it, I think like Korra kind of learned something from all of her villains, except in a way from the Red Lotus, because her connection to them was more or less her just not trying to not be killed by them. They tried to bring in a little bit more of a connection to it, but I think they missed the mark by not having her connection to it be because of what happened before. I don't get why they emphasized it so much in book 2, that she was so upset with Tenzin and her father because of being held in the compound. Yet, when it's revealed that it was actually like Zaheer, Pali, Ghazan, and Ming-Hua trying to kidnap her before that actually caused it, why doesn't that create a dynamic for Korra with the villains? When that was like the big thing, she sort of forgave her mentor figures for it because of her development, but now she has the actual reason behind it. Why isn't she a little bit more intense about the villains because of that? And I think that's where we sort of missed the mark a bit here, in that Amon deals with like his abilities to take bending away, so that counters like Korra's early focus, which is that she's an amazing bender. What if she lost her bending? With book 2, instant connection, because Unalaq's a family member. It's like he's her uncle. Him turning her mentors against her, becoming her mentor, and then him betraying her, and that setting her character arc off. That immediately kind of creates the connection. I think they didn't quite have that here, because Korra just flat out doesn't interact with basically like 3 of the 4 members of the group, and you can't exactly say it's kind of like a classic combination of Korra and Zaheer, based off their couple of interactions, because their best interaction is their book 4 one. So, as I said, I like book 4. I think there's some really good stuff that comes out of this. Bolin's now a lava bender. Opal, Kai are characters. The airbenders have come back. Korra being in the position that she is sets up a really, really like amazing emotional kind of character arc for book 4 to start off with. It's just that, for me, one of the big standout things with Korra has always been that, that book is kind of defined by how good the villains are. This is the one book where I feel the villains, I think, really fall flat. We'll discuss with book 4, Kuvira kind of being this kind of weird middle ground of like, I don't think they do her quite as bad as they do the Red Lotus, but I don't think she's quite as good as Amon or Unalaq. And we'll get to that as we go through book 4. But that's been the review for Venom of the Red Lotus, the book 3 finale. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this episode. plus what I had to say overall about all of Book 3. What are your thoughts on Book 3 change as a whole? And yeah, we'll start Book 4 reviews next week. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.